Good morning. Welcome to Volume 6 of the Ask the Rabbi series. Our last one was the Pesach edition. We are now on our way to Shavuos. Well, this isn't the Shavuos edition. I didn't get any Shavuos questions yet. Maybe we'll get some today. So the thing I wanted to start off is that yesterday in our Mishnah Berurah class, we were talking about saying tevilas, and it actually ties in nicely to giving a shir about halakha, because there's an interesting story over here where it talks about when can you go ahead and recite this prayer. So it's Gemara and Brachos. It's on 30a, and the story goes like this: you have Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshes. We're walking, and they were on a highway. Okay. So Rav Chisda wanted to go and recite tevilas. Okay. So Rav Sheshes says to who himself was blind. He said he kind of felt that Rav Chisda was doing something. He wasn't sure what that was. And the response to him was that he has stopped to pray. And Rav Sheshes says, okay, well, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to pray as well. Okay? So there's a reason why this is interesting, is because Rav Sheshes held when you were traveling, you don't need to say tevilas while standing. And so he quotes him for himself the pasuk, Mios Tov al tikra ra. He says, from being good, do not recite things that are wicked. Meaning, you should, you can do better if you can do better. So even though you're not required to stop for this blessing, it's still nice to. So standing in order to focus on it better is good, and he wants to honor Rav Chisda and Rav Chisda's opinion. So it's a great way to explain the way in which some things work in halakha as well, is that in many cases you may have your preferred opinion, your preferred approach, but sometimes you're going to disagree with somebody, but there's no reason to fervently disagree, then you don't need to fervently disagree. And with that, let's go into some of the questions that we have collected over the past few weeks. Like I said, we haven't given a shir since right before Pesach. So someone asked the question, what is Karaitism or Karaite? The question was, what is Karaite Judaism, more appropriately called Karaitism, and how has it influenced or connected to modern Orthodox Judaism? Okay, and that's what the question was. So someone tried to respond to it by explaining what Karaite Judaism was. It's actually not fair to refer to it as Karaite Judaism. It's Karaism, because it is a branch of people that were halakhically Jewish that started their own religion. That religion no longer believed in the authority of the oral law as passed down by the rabbis in the Talmud. So Karaism doesn't show up until much later on, meaning they're later than the original Karaites, which were the Tzedakim, the followers of Tzadok and Baisus, who lived during the Second Temple period. And as with a number of other groups that splinter off from Judaism, like Christianity and so on, these are much later. So there really is no influence between the two. The Karaites flourished mostly during the 10th and 11th centuries. In the 12th century, Maimonides basically ended their affiliation with the Jewish people by prohibiting marriage contracts with the Karaites. They continue to exist to this day, but they are not considered part of the Jewish people. And these laws are recorded. That law is recorded to the end of Siman Daled in Even Ezer by the Ramah. So the law and the agreement and the opinion of Maimonides is basically shared there. Now, what's interesting is that I don't want to dwell too long on Karaites. The interesting thing is that they manufacture their own problem, meaning had they simply stuck with rabbinic Judaism, they could have maybe argued a few other things, and there were influences in Egypt that were noticeable later on. For example, the Karaites took literally that one should not leave their house on the seventh day, which is stated in Parshas Beshalach by the Man. Right, someone should not leave the entrance of their home on the seventh day, and therefore they only permitted people to go to shul or whatever because that seemed to be like the thing to do. And what's interesting is there's a letter from Rabbi Bartanura on a trip that he took some trips. Bartanura is a city in Italy, and he's famous for his commentary on the Mishnah. But he also collected some letters that we still have extant in these days. And I happened to read it in a collection of letters. And he goes on this trip through North Africa. He stops through Cairo, and he records how he says, these people are very diligent on Shabbat. They don't leave their houses. They go to the shul and back to the house, and that's it. And he makes that suggestion. It's entirely possible that they may have been influenced by the Karaites themselves, who used to live in North Africa and didn't leave their homes. So people went to go pray in the synagogue. So that was a common practice. So it's just something interesting to think about. The next question was, what are the implications of my conversion if I want to raise Jewish children? So the person who wrote this is male. So here's the way that would work. So your children, as long as you are focusing on staying within Orthodox Judaism, the way that this would work is like this: is that you would have to marry somebody who also is Jewish, and they would also want to live an Orthodox Jewish lifestyle, meaning there is things like Reform Judaism and other such things, and you are focusing on the practice together, so that would allow you to continue living a normal lifestyle. You could also, in some cases, not get married, but continue living an Orthodox Jewish lifestyle. However, for young men that convert, they would technically be taking on themselves the obligation to have children. So that would be the implication, is that if you were to get married, you should try to get married because you should be fulfilling that mitzvah, and then try to have children. And to fulfill that mitzvah, it's the first mitzvah in Even Ezer. It's the first halacha there. Basically, one boy and one girl fulfills the mitzvah. So those are the implications of it. Okay, next question is one that we have talked about a while ago on other series in our classes. In Avos class, we talked about priority in receiving tzedakah. So I refer you to that if you'd like to get more in-depth information on it. So priority basically charity starts in the home. So your family members get it first, and then it becomes your immediate neighbors when it's not your family, and then the people in your city, and it kind of goes up from there. And then some people compare the land of Israel as the same as being the poor of your city. That trend started as people began to try to move back to the land of Israel some 300 years ago, and they were trying to figure out whether they could ask for money in collecting lots of cities, and the answer was yes, because they should be considered the poor of your city because they're trying to move back to the land of Israel. Can tzedakah be given anonymously, and is this considered a higher level of giving? So we actually talked about that in one of the shiurim in Avos Chesed. Giving anonymously was actually talked about in the Gemara, where one rabbi went ahead and would anonymously deliver money to somebody's home for many years. And it's considered a very high form. And one day they tried to figure out who was giving them tzedakah. So they waited all night to catch the Rav who was doing it. So it's interesting Gemara. I think Gemara is in Arachin. Is withholding forgiveness ever morally justified? Yes, you can do that. The Rambam talks about this in Hilchos Shuvah. A person, when they come to ask for forgiveness, then what they should do is do it in a sincere way, and you should be satisfied with it. And if you're unsatisfied with it, you can basically request that they come back with more people. They add 3, they go up to 10. At 10, and they've come back several times. Once they've made the effort, that's considered. You have to consider that as having made the effort. So you get up to that much to kind of say, I don't think it's sincere. So if they just came by passing, it's like, I wish everyone would forgive. I wish you would forgive me. So if they bring 10 people, they ask for forgiveness. That's considered a proper amount of forgiveness. If a person never asks for your forgiveness, you aren't required to give it to them. However, there are other prohibitions, which is not to hate people in your heart and not to take revenge. But those are, you must attach an action to those feelings. So if you're struggling with some of the feelings, as long as you're not acting on them, you can try to redirect some of those feelings into positive goals. But the problem with being angry is it leads to bad actions, and bad acting in general. So you should try to make sure that you basically clarify the mind and find positive ways in which to express yourself. In some ways, it almost sounds like the Jedi code. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to suffering, suffering leads to hatred, and that leads to the dark side, right? It's that same type of progression in halakha. The bad feelings lead to bad thoughts. The bad thoughts lead to conniving actions, and the conniving actions lead to bad actions, and so on and so forth. We call it avera gereres avera. Sins lead to more sins. You get drawn down a path, and you have to pull yourself out of it, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And you want to try to not get yourself stuck in it. Next question over here. How do you honor your father and mother if they are not honorable? Okay, so there are exceptions to honoring father and mother. So if a parent is not observant, they actually do not receive any honors. You're not obligated to honor them. However, that doesn't mean that you're supposed to treat them like garbage. Just that the honors due to a father and mother are no longer applicable when they themselves are not observing Torah. So, for example, there's things like not responding back to them, and not to speak back to them in a disruptive or a challenging way. Not to sit in their space. When they come to you, when they call to you for help, you have to come to them. Those things are not applicable when they are not observant. The other times when it also doesn't apply is if, for example, if they are observant, when they ask you to do something that violates Torah laws, you are exempt from having to follow that instruction and having to honor them, as it would be, to fulfill their wishes. Okay. Another question over here is, how do you deal with the backlash from prioritizing Judaism versus your family, such as while you're converting? So it's a difficult situation, because it's always important to recognize that going through a conversion process, or to even practice Judaism as someone who's born into it, is the idea is to always have peaceful paths, that the ways of Torah are constantly peaceful. All those paths are pleasant, and all of those paths lead to peace. There is no reason not to have that. So if someone is struggling with your definition of yourself, that's usually a they problem, and they need to learn to be more respectful of what it is that you'd like to do for yourself. And if they are not able to do that, then they need to help foster conversation to help them deal with their feelings. Sometimes they need to move the frustration. Sometimes they will just take out the frustration on you. And you need to set good boundaries with how this is done. You are allowed to define yourself as you see fit to define yourself. It's also good to have regular rabbinic counseling. Make sure you are defining yourself in a manner that is consummate with the established normative halacha, meaning you should be a fine mensch and a good yid, right? And so that you should be all of those things, and that's important. So that's if you're getting a lot of backlash, just kind of find out where that's coming from. Engage in good dialogue. Have some boundaries about what you are willing to accept and what you are not willing to accept. Here's a situation that I heard about recently. Is the question was, or somebody posted something that they claimed that they were told to have to redo their Judaism because they were an adopted child from a non-Jewish family, and their parents just raised them Jewish and never told them they were ever adopted, and so then they also were told to kosher the entire household and to immerse all the dishes. So the thing that was interesting about this is that there's a couple of issues over here when people do this and they get a psak from somebody else. My issue number one is who gave the psak, and they should be much more clear about how they deliver these types of decisions. And what usually tends to happen is they're not delivered in the process of what someone is based in. They're not delivered properly, and somebody basically goes off on their own and does something privately with a private decision. And the problem is it has other implications above and beyond what is it they are doing. And so when they do stuff like that on their own, sort of quietly, and then it kind of comes out, then you have other issues. So, for example, when it comes to personal status issues, if you declare a person to be not Jewish, that then impacts any children that they may have had before or after. So the problem with this situation is that it lends itself to basically being a big issue, because it makes me wonder sometimes, when someone doesn't say, when someone does something that just seems a bit odd, especially in cases like this, like is not disclosed, such as not disclosing an adoption. It makes me wonder if the person who handled it made the right decision. That's the first thing. So you have to, if it wasn't handled in a Beis Din, and I just asked somebody, it needs to be done properly, because when you're changing someone's personal status, if they were already observant and you want to declare them to be not something, you have to have some solid proof. So that requires a court. And there's an interesting case from Rabbi Eger many years ago where it was a personal status case, and he said the local rabbi was handling it himself. Rabbi Eger chastised him and says, I don't understand. How did you handle this yourself? You're receiving testimony from witnesses. You're getting information and evidence. He said, this is a court case. You need to have a Beis Din. So he says to them, this is 200 years ago, and the Musar, the advice, should hold just as well today as well. And so that's something an issue there. And then they were told that they had to kosher all their utensils and tovel all the keilim, which basically means that they're told to kosher all the utensils, to purge them from all the unkosher flavors. Why? Well, they've been keeping kosher forever. What's the problem? So whoever this person was who made the ruling said that they were not Jewish, and therefore it renders all of the utensils not kosher. Let's unpack that for a second. So that statement is actually consistent. The idea of a non-Jew cooking in utensils, even if it's kosher food, is that prohibits the keilim, is actually mentioned at the very end of Yoredea Kuf Yud Gimel. It's a whole section over there talking about bishul Akum, that is the rabbis prohibited non-Jews cooking for Jews, so that way they shouldn't get so familiar with each other, which is kind of funny in a case where two people were married for X number of time, discover one partner is quote-unquote not Jewish, and then all of a sudden ostering all their utensils. So that case is not found in the Shulchan Aruch, and in fact, the Shulchan Aruch actually records that as a machlokas whether or not the utensils need to be koshered. And even the people who hold that they do need to be koshered hold that they only need to be, they are not like other non-kosher things. The flavors are actually considered quote-unquote batal barov. So there's plenty of room to be lenient on that and not require them to kosher all their utensils for a number of reasons, which I think seems to run counter to the theory of this. Also because since this person was also in a relationship, it makes zero sense that you couldn't rely on the opinions of the Ramban and others who hold that if you had somebody in your house who was serving you, that they're working for you and doing stuff for you, there's no bishul Akum in those cases. So they exempt someone who's regularly in your home from bishul Akum, because maybe you adjust the fire, maybe you do this, and the Ramah brings that earlier on in Kuf Yud Gimel. So I don't know why this person decided to be so strict on them. It seems a bit outlandish. And then requiring them to immerse all the vessels again. So that one was a little bit interesting as well, because in the laws of tevilas keilim, also in Yoredea, in Kuf Chav Beis, in 122, it says in the 15th halacha over there that if a Jew gives a non-Jew utensils to immerse, they shouldn't rely on them to say that they have been immersed. However, if he went and did it, and then b'diavad, meaning after the fact, went and did it anyway, it's okay. So if it's somebody living by themselves, and maybe you want to argue that that they flip positions, but it's two people who own the utensils together, and there's no way. There's also something to consider, is that it's not so simple to simply say, I'm living in a place and I own these utensils. It's highly possible to say that only one person owned it and ask the other person to immerse it for them. It'd be hard to delineate which one is which. So that one I would think to be leaning on as well. But in conversing with other people about such a case, they felt that immersing the dishes would be appropriate. But anyway, I thought it would be interesting to sort of hear about that case. I was actually also surprised that somebody put that stuff out in public the way that they did. So, and so someone asked on this case, followed up. So wouldn't the first priority after that being to reconcile the status? Yes, that's what they did. So they immersed them, Shem Geirus, and then it sounds like they redid the marriage. However, they didn't state that. I'm assuming that's what they did. So, and so the ones also pointed out in the chat over here that what's it called? That if only if they were the wife's keilim would it not be a problem, which is true, which is something that could have been investigated to actually be lenient in this case. And so, one person pointed out that if a non-Jew turns on the oven, then it needs to be koshered, which is also true. But that's only if they were not working for you regularly. If they came to your house and cooked something for themselves in your keilim, that would be problematic. Okay. Let's see. Next question over here is a Connect self-winding watch stops on Shabbos. Can you shake it to get it going again? So if it's already going, you can continue to shake it. But once it stops, you shouldn't start it up again. And this appears to be a rabbinic stringency because of makvah patish or anything else or molid. For different people take different approaches to it. But if it's already going, then you can do that. To move the actual hands to get to the right time would not be a problem, because that's something that isn't even mechanical. It's you dislodge it from the mechanics still go tick 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 underneath, and you just dislodge the hands from it in order to move them yourself. So you can do that, move them to the right spot and fix it. Now some people I'm sure would argue, well, you're fixing something on Shabbos and blah blah blah. So some people might argue that, but not necessarily the problem that we might think it is. Let's see over here. So do we have any questions in the chat? I didn't see any questions in the chat. Okay. Oh, well, hi to everybody. Thanks for saying hello in the chat. Very nice of you. Okay, so I didn't have any other questions in there. I do have some other interesting questions. So here's some other interesting questions that have come up. So here's an interesting question. Now, it's a mikvah question, so this is long and involved. So if other people have questions, jump in and I'll stop this question. But this last question will probably be the last one we'll have for the class if there's no other questions coming up. In building a modern mikvah, often people want to have their water filtered so it's nice and clean to go in. Hot, clean water. Everyone wants hot, clean water, okay? So can you put a filter into a mikvah, and would that be allowed? So famously, there's a question from Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt, wrote to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Both of them are Zichrono Tzadikim Livracha. They've both since passed on. Rabbi Greenblatt wrote to Rav Moshe some 60, 70 years ago. He was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he wanted to know if they could allow a swimming pool to fill up with water and then turn that into their mikvah. So there was a local swimming pool. It was completely dry, completely empty, and they wanted to let it sit until it got a couple hundred gallons of rainwater in it and turn it into the community mikvah as well. As he's describing it, he describes a process of filtering the water. And Rav Moshe was very intrigued by that. He said, it sounds good until you talked about the filter. The filter seems to be a problem. What's the problem? He says the problem is that the filter is a vessel, is a kli, which removes I don't know Arabic. So the water is suctioned out and goes into another receptacle for cleaning the water, sometimes oxidizing it, putting more oxygen back into it, and then running it back through another tube back into the pool itself. There's a problem in the Rishonim, there's a problem in the early rabbis of defining what is known as nasan sa v'natal sa, or natal sa v'nasan sa. There's a problem of taking water from one pool of water and putting it into another pool of water, because you're not allowed to draw the water. Mikvahs must be made from water that is from the ground, or fallen from the sky. Either must come up from the ground and collect somewhere here, or continue flowing and just be large enough for you to fit yourself in, or fall from the sky and collect in another place, right? Because a mikveh literally means a collection of water. So in a case of where you're taking water out and putting water back in, the problem is that you're actually putting drawn water into the mikvah. The Mishnah in mikvahos basically says that one is not allowed to take drawn water and add it to the mikvah and to a measurement of what's known as shlosha lugim, which is about a quart and a quarter, maybe a quart and a half of water, okay? So you're not allowed to add that much drawn water into a mikvah. Now, most people understand this statement of the Mishnah as referring to when you have less than the required amount of water, and then you're adding drawn water in the amount of shlosha lugim to the mikvah. That would then render the mikvah unfit for usage because you have basically made it with drawn water. However, once the mikvah is at its requisite amount of 40 saw, of at least 40 saw, okay, so like a couple hundred gallons, drawn water added to it becomes nullified through a process known as hashaka, or whatever you want to call it, or bittul. There's a couple of ways to describe it. So there's a couple of Rishonim that disagree in the way this works. So Maimonides says, the Rambam says, that if one takes water out of the mikvah and then adds drawn water back into it, that is prohibited until you replace the water inside of it. And funny enough, the Ravid, normally the person who disagrees with him the most, agrees with him wholeheartedly that this is the actual correct way to understand the Mishnah. Different way. The Ravid is talking about cases where the Mishnah spill from one to another. Let's say water is rolling down a hill and they're developing different pits of water. And so you want to develop one pit and get into another pit because you add drawn water to one to spill it over into the next one. So the Ravid says you have up until the volume of the initial one to add to the second one. If you surpass that, then you are no longer allowed to use the mikvah, would no longer be kosher. Sorry for the camera. They did an update on Apple that is causing the camera to be much more volatile than it had been in the past. I'm sure they'll send another update to patch this soon. So in the case of a filter which is constantly running, at some point you're going to draw the water, and that's gonna all add up to drawn water and outnumber the amount of water that had landed in the pool via rainwater, which would make it unacceptable. So Moshe therefore says, I'll leave it up to you to decide what's the best way to go ahead and use this. Using a pool skimmer net by hand for debris would be okay. Yes, so if you leave the water connected, like if you take a net and you run it through to get debris out of it, that would be fine. Because number one, the water's still there. And then also too, if you were, for example, you'll see sometimes at keilim mikvahs, you'll see sometimes for immersing vessels or utensils in a mikvah, there's often people leave a basket in there that has a lot of perforations in it. And that's okay because the water passes through freely and it's not really a receptacle that can hold water. And so they allow you to use that. So Rav Moshe did not allow that. So let's say you have a kosher mikvah and you want to try to use a filter on it. What would you do? So I had dealt with this question years ago, and so there's interesting dispute as to whether or not you can filter the water and what to do with the filtered water. So one of the things you would do in a regular standard mikvah is that there's 3 different water pits in a standard Ashkenazi mikvah, and there's one that does the water where the water spills out into the mikvah, another one where the mikvah touches the other mikvah water, and then there's one that you immerse in. So the water that gets filtered, they take the filtered water and they dump it into the water in the pit that is they dump it into onto a channel, and the channel runs into the main mikvah, and then you close off the other pool, the other mikvah that is holding water in a canister, and after you're done filtering the main water in, you open up your bor hashaka, the kissing one that makes the connection. Hashaka means to kiss; it connects, and that then makes the water that's in the immersion pool 100% kosher again. So you don't have to have this problem of the ratio being reduced even by filtering it. So that is how we solve that problem. And the question that I had was, you need to close that pit if you're going to if you're going to filter the water. And the answer I got years ago, the answer I just recently asked again, well, yeah, 100% needed to be closed. But it was hard to figure out what they were doing with it. And some people are trying to change it so that way it's not considered a vessel, that they could build it so that way the water's not considered drawn. But it doesn't really matter, because once you filter it and you put it back into the main pit and do that, it's going to become kosher again once you could reconnect the two pits. So with no further questions, I thank everyone for joining today, and we will look for you next time on Ask the Rabbi. We'll be very excited to do Volume 7. Adding chemicals to the mikvah is okay because they don't change the color. Yes, very good question. So you add chlorine, because chlorine will be clear. Thank you so much.